morning we have our esteemed scholar, friend, mentor, and comrade, Zaman Stanizai, who will speak to us. And your subject is? The uniqueness of all of us. Of all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I didn't know I was supposed to be talking here today. Leland was asking me to speak last week, and since I was planning on attending the Seeds of Peace conference, I tried to talk myself out of it and say, well, maybe I'll talk another time. But I didn't know that the other time was to be the next Sunday. And I was busy working in the backyard when Stephen called the day before, and he said, so what will you be talking about? And I said, what are you talking about? And he says, no, what will you be talking about? We figured out in the context of this whole thing that he said, well, Leland said that you will be presenting on Sunday. And, well, one thing led to another, so I said, well, okay, well, if that's the case, then let's see, what will I be talking about? So I thought about the things that I was thinking about. And after a discussion, he said, okay, let me write this down. And he sent me this very beautifully worded announcement. And I read it, I said, this sounds so interesting, maybe I should attend. So I'm here. Thank you. These are basically my reflections when I was working in the garden. And if they don't make sense, they're not supposed to, because I don't understand them myself. But we will share them, and if we could reflect further on them, fine. If not, even better. It was just thinking in the context of a word that is called chaos. And most of our mythologies refer to chaos one way or another, and I was wondering, why did they call it chaos? The linguist in me couldn't keep quiet. And then the thinker in me jumped in and he said, they call it chaos because they couldn't figure it out. And so I said, well, then how do we figure things out? And from my observation, not in the real world, but on the other side of the retina, I thought that perhaps because we humans have become too rational, and our rationality is based on finding patterns in things, and that is the only way we can figure things out. And that might seem very natural and normal to many, but I think it's the most natural thing, the way we think. If you look at all the things that we have thought out or thought about, just stand in stark contrast to things that are natural. A perfect circle, a straight line, a triangle, a rectangle. Any of these geometric shapes are human thoughts produced in some form. And there's nothing like it in nature. When you see a straight line somewhere, you automatically know that that is the hand of man, not the hand of God. And so, in that sense, we are thinking unnaturally, claiming it to be natural. And so, if the early human beings attained to consciousness, and if consciousness was equated to thinking, and the thinking was patterned to be unnatural, therefore, the natural chaos had to be incomprehensible for humanity, because we couldn't figure out the pattern. So then our thinking is patterned after patterns, and some of the early patterns that we are thinking about is like when we first come to this world, we hear these noises that these strange figures are making around us, called mother and father. We have no idea what they are saying or why they are doing what they are doing. But slowly we figure out a pattern. a pattern of sound. The sound pattern of English, Noam Chomsky's famous work on phonology, for instance. The pattern of syntax, the semantics, the grammar itself. If it didn't have a pattern, we would not be able to figure it out. If we could make every noun plural in a different way, we would not learn a language. So there has to be a pattern. And so that is our first ability to figure things out. At some point that mama means the guilty one and papa means the irresponsible one and so on. But then comes the thing that, so if thinking is what made us who we are, and at the height of the age of rationalism and enlightenment, we know of a story between two great thinkers in France, Saint-Germain and René Descartes, who were debating this over and over and over. And their conclusion was that thought does not have primacy, but being does. That we are, and therefore we think. But because of the trend and the predominant rationalist mindset of the time, they had to be politically correct. And so for at least the sake of political correctness, he announced, Je pense donc je suis. I think, therefore I am. And nobody questioned it. And so with that, the first premise that we are, therefore we think, was buried forever. And humanity, our humanity, was defined in the primacy of thought, that thinking comes first. We also can follow another dimension, that is the early humans, when they found patterns not in sound and in language, but in nature and in their environment, which became a necessary part of their survival. But science has this obsession with observation and experimentation and replication in order for something to be scientifically true, which they call a fact. And in the process of that, they reached a stage in more recent time that this complex being called human, that regardless of all the other complexities we have 86 billion with a B, neurons and nerve endings. I can't fathom that mathematical number, but they are telling me that perhaps I'm one of those. So I have it. I'm sure we all do. But they have devised instruments that can measure the thinking process as we think, as how these neurons, I might not be using the neuropsychology terminology correctly, but I can at least show off that they sort of light up, whatever that means, like the candles on the table here, when thinking happens. And based on that, they have come to the conclusion, at least according to one study, that the image part, sensing an image as we observe it, comes 200th of a second earlier than the thinking part. So if we equate the image part with our imaginative power in the realm of both imagination and in the imaginal realm, then imagination precedes thinking based on the scientific experimentation, which seems to be a fact, at least for now, until we find better scientists in some future point in time. The gravity of what I just said, not that I'm saying it, is that science has proved it so wrong that thought does not have primacy, something else comes before. In other words, we are therefore we think.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, the last 300-400 years of our claim to being rationalist being is gone down the drain. That same scientific community that took so much pride in sort of burying religion or the hatchet of fighting religion was taking so much pride that finally we have become so civilized and so intelligent that we figured it out and earlier human civilizations hadn't. They've all kept quiet about it. That they prove themselves wrong. We are, therefore we think. So our beingness is prime. And so as these thoughts go through us, not that we are thinking, but the thoughts are operating through us, so we are the instrument. Not that the thought is the subject. It gets to a point is like, okay, oh, that first premise of patterns, what happened to the patterns? We start with the childhood, we grow up, we apply it to everything in life. When we can't find something rationally, we always conveniently go to our emotional side. So if the mind is absent, the heart is there, which comes in handy. And in that, we try to look for patterns around us. And one of the ways we look for patterns around us is that if we find patterns that are acceptable, quote-unquote acceptable, then they're good. And if they're different or a little too different, then we say, I'm not sure. And this, you might think, is very simple, but it's very deep because in my assessment, based on what I was doing in the garden the other day, proof that probably most of the human conflicts, political, religious, social, ideological, all of them boil down to this pattern thinking. I accept you if the pattern on your face resembles the pattern that I see in the mirror every morning. So if you look like me, then you're okay. Whether my criteria is the shape of your face, the pigment of your skin, and we can extend it to even the way you believe. So if you believe like me, if you think like me, and oh, of course, if you speak like me, then you're okay. So ethno-linguistic, religious, political, ideological conflicts are the ones that are resulting in all the death and mayhem around the world. Is because it's the pattern that we are still looking for as a criteria for acceptability. And any that is defined as the other, or that's my favorite word, not that I favor it, but that which would be sometimes defined as the word enemy, which is not actually in me, but I project it outside. And it's like in the words me and we, the difference. In, you stick to your gun. And we, the W part, you open to the world. So when you're receptive in accepting things and entities without the criteria of acceptable patterns, then you're an inclusive group like we are here. But when you have set the standard that the criteria for acceptability is me, my soul, my ego, then everybody else is, if not the enemy, at least the other. And once they fall outside of the norms of acceptability, then you do one of the two things. You either try to make everyone like you, if that is possible. Some might have plastic surgery, whatever. But conversion, that's a nice way. So what is a conversion? So if you use the Latin base, the root of the word ver, to move in the direction of. Con is to come with. Doris, correct me if I blunder. So conversion, and that means you move in my direction, or with me, or be part of me, or be part of the acceptable pattern that I'm thinking of, then that's okay. So we keep making things like ourselves. Regime change. We don't want your regime, we want to make your regime like ours, because yours is functioning and ours isn't. Maybe we should have all dysfunctional regimes. And so it gets to a point where when we make them so much like ourselves, then we look around and say, oh my God, because everybody has become like me, I lost myself. Then we reverse this. Then we want to stand out. Now we want to be different. We want to distinguish ourselves. And what is our distinction? So the ego takes over. Now we want to be different. After we have made everybody like ourselves, now we are looking for making things different. But in that difference, it is my supremacy, my being above everyone else, that runs the show. And so we create class difference or other distinction where the whole appeal is to treat you like you are different than everyone else and you're supposed to be taking pride in it. And so our thinking has become one where we are not comfortable at either level. When we recognize that they're all different, we want to make them the same as us. Whether we are talking about religion, ideology, language, whatever, nationality. And then once they become the same like us, then we want to be different. And then we make ourselves so different that we feel good for ourselves. And part of the reason that we feel good is because we have made sure they look bad. So our goodness comes at the cost of making someone else bad, which also feeds our ego. And this, if we only operated within ourselves, that would be fine. But all of a sudden we become gods. And the God is reflected in a way where we say, I can't make the distinction between whether I am the human or the God, but if I'm above everyone else, my God too is better than everyone else's. And so then we start fighting for that to prove that my God is better than your God. And if I can't convince you with the pen, then I will be trying to convince you with the blade of the sword. And the mayhem begins all over again. And this is the human story. These are my reflections. And like I said, they are in the raw. Thank you.
But it's not everything you just described. I mean, maybe I'm viewing it differently, but with everything you just described, you started off with the words chaos. You started off with structure. You started off with geometry. You started off with, we're all taught to do these certain things. All of those things in general is the chaos.
Right.
I mean, everything. That is the chaos. You have to make sense of that chaos.
Exactly.
So that's just something we have to do as individuals to follow our path.
Yeah, the thing would be that it's in our level at our state of comfort in this oscillation, in this swinging of the pendulum. I think our self-actualization has to be centered on not where you are and where are you going, because you know you're going to come back to where you were, is to have a sense of saying, look, I am where I am, and I like it. And back from our Eastern cultures, we have a great philosopher who expressed his wisdom through folly and humor. His name is Mullah Nasruddin, claimed by Afghans, Persians, and Turks alike, and they have not finished that battle. And one day he was arguing with his wife, and he thought that was something new, but they were doing that before too. And he just all of a sudden jumped, and the wife said, like, what? He said, I found the center of the world. And she said, like, what? Where is it? And he said, right here. And she said, like, how do you know? He said, go ahead, measure. So we have to find the center of the world, the center of our gravity, and not the physical gravity, our spiritual gravity. When we talk about the pendulum is swinging because it's looking for the gravity. And it doesn't know where to stop. And we have become like that too. And since I mentioned our great philosopher, Mullah Nasruddin, he had another one too. When Timur Lenk came to Samarkand, and Mullah really wanted to see this great conqueror, and had no way. And then he saw these musicians were walking to the palace, and he said, "Can I go with you? Can I go with you?" He says, "What do you play?" He said, "I don't play anything." He said, "Well, this is for musicians." He said, "Well, I'll join you. Please, I want to see this great conqueror of Central Asia." He says, "All right." So they give him some stringed instrument, and says, "Okay, now pretend that you're playing, but don't say a thing because we don't want to get in trouble." So they go and they sit there on the stage, and Timur is on the other side watching, and so they were trying to tune up their instruments. But Timur was a smart man, and he noticed after a while, like one musician over there, he's just sitting there and plucking that one string, one chord in one fret, and he's not moving anywhere. So he kind of would curiously say, "Why aren't you tuning up your instrument? Why aren't your fingers going up and down?" And he said, "Your Majesty, they are searching. I have found it." Which is, I think, what we need to do, is that the search is wonderful, but we have to find it somewhere, whether it's the center of our gravity in the pendulum, or whether it is the string that we are plucking. But a lot of us are searching. It's okay to search, but do you feel comfortable searching?
Well, and Dancing Mary Man has a book called There Are No Enemies. Do you agree with that?
Of course. The enemy is within.
Yeah. Okay.
It is the projection of the dark shadow within that we want to put out there because we don't want to identify it as our part. It has to be part of that other. So that other is none than yourself, your own shadow.
Well, I can't disagree with anything you said, but I do want to talk about what you didn't say. And I think, as I look back at my first recollection that I could recall, it was a sense of pattern. It was a pattern in a wallpaper, and that had to do with image. And I did become aware that there was something. This is earliest 2 years old, earliest recollection. But I think before that, there is another level of recollection. And you did not mention the body, its comfort, its seeking food, and it's associating the mother with the food. You only started with the cognitive awareness. You did not start with the precognitive awareness of the body and its needs. And so, even though I don't want to disagree with anything you said, I really think that there's an enormous amount of pattern recognition that takes place on a precognitive level that actually gives us access to harmony and oneness and peace and all is right in the worldness. So I don't know where that fits in, so maybe you'd like to comment on how that makes us, doesn't that make us more peaceful and harmonious rather than less?
Well, I mean, my gardening is not finished. I need some more work, but I think there's a lot more depth to almost every dimension of. I'm just scratching the surface. Is that it's not only in the idea of the pattern itself, but it's the various dimensions hidden within those patterns that's how to read it. You mentioned food, for example. How food is associated with certain cultural pattern. You know, remember, the only reason we are here is because of food. Remember, Columbus was looking for spices, right? I think at the precognitive level, remember there was something in the news like about 2-3 years ago that a child was born without a brain. And I just heard that, and some voice came out of me, totally spontaneous and with a degree of total irresponsibility. And I say, what was he thinking? And my daughter gave me a look, because she was thinking like, look at this poor kid, this mother who has given birth to a child, and the child doesn't have a brain. And that she thought I was probably making fun of it, but I wasn't. And when I said, what was he thinking, was at that level is that at one point the Creator created a being. So what was the Creator thinking of creating a being that could not be thinking? And the second one will be the precognitive level, is that this being that came into existence, where the being, Cartesian theory, where the being is proven that is there, but the thinking is not that it's not there, but it's totally irrelevant. So therefore you could have a beingness without a thinkingness.
You can't have life without a brain that controls your breathing, your heartbeat.
We'll see.
Yeah, it doesn't, there's no
How
such
long did
thing.
the child live?
Sorry?
How long did the baby live?
After I got that look from my daughter, I didn't even search.
No, the brain controls everything, how your heart beats and how your body works. It's all the brain, so if there's no brain, there's no body.
I wanted to jump in on what Doris said, because it's a segue or a door into the question that I had about the 200th of a second.
Mm-hmm.
That the image arises 200th of a second before the thought.
Mm-hmm.
And that's through an MRI of the brain?
No, it's some other process of studying the activity of the neurons as they are triggered by the process of seeing things and then thinking about it. Because we believe that you cannot think, and we believe, sorry, that wasn't a royal one. My understanding is that we cannot think unless we think about a thing. So our thinking is triggered by an object being imagined by the human mind, whether we assign a name, a value, or whatever to it, but the thing has to be there for us to think. And this in itself, in a different way, disproves the Cartesian equation, or axiom.
So perception comes to mind, so it has to do with perception?
Here I need to give it another dimension. Sometimes in being very provocative, I state that God doesn't have imagination, and everybody's like, they might think I'm an heretic, and I'm sure you claim to be Muslim, and I say yes. The imagination that we have is an intermediary stage, because whatever we want to create as a secondary medium is we cannot create it unless we first create it in our imagination. And so it has to be here, because we do not have the ability to create it immediately. That belongs to God. So if God has the ability to command, be, and so it is, therefore, what is the need for imagination? In other words, we need the blueprint of the imagination to act upon it and turn it into a physical or some conceptual creation. And God doesn't. So in that case, that part of the imagination has to precede in us because we are not gods. And once it precedes, it relegates the thinking to the background by those two, 1/200th of a second length of time. Yes?
I wouldn't worry about the 1/200th of a second for a second, or 1/200th of a second.
Uh-huh.
I think what we're talking about is the interplay of the form and the formless. And there's a constant interplay. There is always form, and there will always be form. We have a body, we have a heart that beats, we have a circulatory system. Nature has form. There is form. But there is also that which precedes the form, if you will. For example, there's a form inherent in a seed that you plant in the garden. Encoded in that seed is the blueprint or the DNA of what that plant is going to become. That is a form. But what precedes it is that which was, I guess you could say it, the intuitive or the creative or the God part of it, which is the mystery. We cannot, in our finite, patterned way of thinking, grasp the mystery that is divine. It is. It just is. And out of that divineness comes a form that we need in order to grasp, to eat a fork, to put on a pair of glasses, to open a book. We need to create structure. We need to create form out of what is essentially formless. But in the doing of that, we forget the formless and we lose the intuitive faculty which is inherent in the imaginative, in God's imagination. You say God doesn't have an imagination, but something gives this breath and this heartbeat and this world revolving around its axis and moving around the sun its form. And that is, we could say, that is God's imagination, but it is totally beyond the definitions or the patterns we want to adhere to it. Because once we start applying those patterns, we lose the essence of what that is. So we're in this constant interplay of form and formless. And when we learn and have enough faith inside our heart and in our soul to let the form and let the pattern be and go deep within the intuitive sense of that which has created it, then we really sense that oneness, because there's no division really between the form and the formless. It just is. It is that state of being that you're talking about. This may sound very abstract, but to me, when you are in the process of writing a piece of music, or creating a poem, or making love, or running in the wind, there's no thought. There's no thought. It just is. Something is happening through us, and we are the vehicle for it. And when we set aside the patterns and get to that essence, we realize a spiritual, intuitive sensing of who we truly are, and how that is beyond our differences, beyond the pigment of our skin, beyond the patterns.
Basic acceptance.
Basic acceptance, right? And then with that comes a deep, abiding sense of faith that there is a life force, there is a creative energy that's moving through us that empowers us to grow and to be who we are. And that's a beautiful thing. That's the spiritual thing. That's the essence of God, if you want to. But we have to give God a name. There's like thousands of names for God. We argue over the names and we forget that intuitive sense of who we really are as spiritual beings. That is the essence of the garden.
I think that there are two things. One, in terms of the form, I included that in the pattern because the pattern could include the abstract as well as the form and the formless. The idea of thought not being operational at all times is not so because we have different levels of thinking. We have active thinking and we have what we might, for lack of a better term, call when you put it on the cruise control. So we do a lot of things spontaneously without an active triggering involvement. But even at the fullest, humans have the capacity only to operationalize like 3 to 4% of the capacity of the brain. In other words, our brain is capable of 96% more than we use.
But it's not just the brain, it's the heart-brain complex.
I know, but I want to tackle the question of the naming of the God. Is that remember when I started with the concept of the speech pattern in the human language development at the stage of acquisition, there's also the idea of logic, both in terms of Greek thought, the logos, the language is related to the logos. And we also have the Arabic term from nutq and mantiq, the speech and the logic are related. It's because there's pattern in logic and the language uses it. And therefore, if the language pattern logically is not used, so if somebody doesn't use logic, we say, you don't make sense. In other words, you're producing sounds, but I can't find the pattern. So someone who speaks nonsense, like I am doing right now, is because the patterns are not clear to the other person to find the logic in the logos, in the logic and the language, or to use the Arabic term, you won't find mantiq in the note of the nataq. So the etymology connects it there. Therefore, when we name a God, whatever name we give it, that God is named at the level of the language pattern. And I think that is the big problem. And it's the big problem because throughout the history, if we're fighting, we're not fighting about God, but we are fighting because somebody else has named their God differently than ours. And the logic compels us to conform them to what we think. And so this forced, what was the word there? Confirmation or coercion or conversion is what creates a different version for all of us to put us in trouble. And if you could somehow identify God without naming it, the world will be very peaceful. But because language is related to culture, then we define God culturally. And it becomes the clash of cultures, not of civilization. It's not. It becomes a battle of cultural difference, and that's where we get to the level of cultural relativism. And the cultural relativism is nothing but the collective human psyche operating at the level where it gets justification from the number. Nothing else.
If you want to speak,
Yes.
just go ahead and speak.
My mom is the Christian Science instructor, and my dad is the imaginative. Like he would tell me, like, I want to know your dream, but he would say, be logical, and listen to your mom. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to dream and be passionate about what I want to do with my life. So in my life, when I'm meeting people, there are two, there's a radar. I think we all have an internal radar, but there's because when I used to work with my mom in business, and there was a time when I would be resentful of her because I had to do her work. And then when I became an adult, 18, 21, I would go to my dad and I'm like, Dad, I'm free now, can we go? And he's like, no, it's not a good time, I have to work, and there are things. So I became semi-isolated in my youth, but in my maturity and adulthood, I've seen a lot of the behaviors of the children that are in my village and the children that were in different circles. So in terms of religion, it's given me a worldly perspective, and I've been accepting and tolerant, but at home it's been dysfunctional, because my mom respects what I say, but my dad is the one that listens. So
Your dad is what?
the one that listens. He in action and word, he respects me. But my mother, she's like, I'm your elder, you're going to listen to me. I'm like, no, you're not my elder, you are 51. That just makes you older than me. That does not make you my elder. So when it's really a dynamic that we all deal with in our religious lives and our social lives.
Religion is the same thing. I think the root word, Doris will help, comes from the rules, making rules and regulations. So we try to create a pattern. Again, if we could, I don't know if it's possible, if you could allow every individual human being to find their own quote-unquote God in their own way, without social conformity to a cultural setting, then I think God will be praised and loved in a beautiful way. But it's that seeking, going from pattern to pattern, is that we say, no, I don't care how you believe in God. I want to know how you identify with what I identify with. So if I can't convert you outright, I would at least want to know where you stand compared to me, because so my perception of the God is what determines how I want to define yours. And that's another struggle. Yes?
I just want to share a couple things. One goes back to an X-ray I viewed recently. I found very surprising. What they did was they took two individuals and put them behind an X-ray machine. And you could not tell what race they were, what age they were, what gender they were, nothing about them. They were just two human beings. And they did this with a multiplicity of different types, in age and race and so forth. And when they came out from behind the machine, everybody was amazed. So I think this is very interesting that, when it comes down to the skeletal level, that we're all the same. Secondly, what has always mystified me, I view the body, the brain, as kind of a receiver. And where we get the input from, I'm not sure. I know there are individuals on this planet, and I'm not one of those, who have what we call a sixth sense. And they are able to communicate with different spirits somehow. And so I'm wondering, if we all had that sixth sense, and the body is merely the receiver, then I've also heard that there is unity on some other plane, and that all entities are united already, of course. And
everybody's throat looks the same.
Yes,
Yes, the bird, the bear, the owl.
No, humans.
No, I mean, everybody has a heart that beats blood, everybody has lungs that breathe air. We're all life is the same life.
Okay.
We define God, but God is, is the fact that we're all here, including the bear, the owl, the raccoon. You see, we're just blind, that's all.
And regarding your experiment that you read about, the 200th second, the image appeared and then the patterns. But it was just an image, it could have been anything. And if we had better technology, is there something that is 200th of a second before that we will know about in 10 years?
Well, first, that was not my experiment, but it was done scientifically, that one I referred to. So the reason I mentioned is that thinking does not have primacy vis-a-vis our being. The X-ray you referred to, the X-rays are very different. They become different once you take a full X-ray and they tell you this one is yours, and you're going to find 100 reasons to justify, okay, this one is taller, that is shorter, this is that. You're going to find things to reflect your own insecurities in them. And for that matter, even the skin is not a problem, except if they told you that this particular pigmentation of the skin is yours. Once it becomes yours, you have to defend it, and it has to be better than others, because remember, we want to show our distinction in it. And the other point...
The question is, if everybody had this sixth sense.
Oh yeah,
developed.
the thing is, no, everybody does not have six
No, they
senses.
do not. They do
We
not.
have 10
Yes, they do.
senses.
They just not work.
Again, the age of rationalism has again excluded the internal senses. We have, at least in the Islamic tradition, 5 internal senses, 5 external ones. The external ones connects us to our environment, and because they are the more sort of visibly observable ones, the scientific community has accepted those and rejected the others. In the in one of the Native American traditions, there are 8 senses. And many more. So 5 is only the external observable that the scientific community has used their monopoly of truth as the established one, but then they cannot deny the other one, so therefore they conveniently put it as the 6th one, because 5 is an establishmentarian thinking, not because there are 5. But like I said, the Muslim culture has developed 10, or recognized 10, and these were done 10 centuries ago. And I'm sure we are a lot more complex than we think. But our problem is that we don't think. We were talking about thinking. We don't think about ourselves. We're all preoccupied with why are those other ones different and why can't they be like me? That's the problem.
I want to go back to your garden and when Stephen called and Leland or whoever it was made up the purpose or the title. You mentioned the word, what is the title?
The uniquenesses of us all.
Uniqueness of us all. Okay, so all I'm asking is, would you reconcile your talk in terms of this title so that I can know?
So she would know the pattern.
I can know.
The uniqueness is that that we are, I don't know if wobbling is the right word, that we are swinging back and forth, not having the ability to feel comfortable as to where do we fit in terms of being distinct, unique, and different, and yet at the same time the same as everything else. And so it's the absence of that level of comfort for an unactualized individual. That when you are searching, searching at the level of being discomfortable, when you don't fit within your skin, is because you haven't found that spiritual gravitation, here is an oxymoron for you, that spiritual gravitational point to which you belong. Whether that is on the clock dial at 7:35, at 2, 3 o'clock, whatever, it's somewhere in there. But you keep looking for it. And I think the way we are raised culturally, we are raised with certain establishmentarian mindsets, is that everything and anything that is yours or in some way related to you has to be the best, because it feeds on your ego, and most of us do have trouble detaching ourselves from that. This is a subjective opinion, but in my opinion, the lucky ones find it earlier, to find that there's another world, and that comes from my personal experience of mountain climbing, that so many times I was so excited and so happy that I finally made it just right over there, and as soon as I climbed that peak, there was another behind it. So wait a minute, so I haven't reached. So you get this perception that everything is within reach, and it's good, because otherwise you won't have enough hope or enough drive to get there. So it's good to have that perception like you made it, you're almost there, you got it. But if that is all there is to it, then I think that is sort of the end of the story prematurely. So I think we have to strive on and look for another peak and keep going. We don't know where the highest peak is.
I think we have to learn to be comfortable living in the ongoing question, rather than expecting that we're going to live in an answer which is absolute. Like climbing a mountain, you climb one mountain, but there's another one. The bear goes over the mountain. You know that song?
Yeah, very well.
Do you ever hear that song?
No, but I'm just
The bear went over the mountain, the bear went over the mountain.
Oh, yeah.
The bear went over the mountain, and what did it?
To see what he could
To
see.
see what he could see. The other side of the mountain. So it's an ongoing, there's an ongoing question that we live in, whether we want to admit it or not, but we want to solidify our existence in an answer. But there's really just an ongoing question. So learning how to live in the question is, I think, to find a comfort zone where we live in the question instead of always having an answer is something for us.
The words of Rajneesh, the truth is already here. It's not something you have to look for. It's not something you're going to find. It is here. This is the truth. It's already here. I ran into somebody with a website who says, you know, I'm going to teach you how to integrate your soul. So I emailed him and said, oh, you have it easy, yeah? Because the soul's already integrated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or I'm looking for God. You're never separated from God. Like the wave is never separated from the ocean. That's like a wave saying, I'm looking for the ocean. Like, yes, we have questions, but that's our thinking. But actually, we're not separate from God. The soul is integrated. And as far as thinking goes, they do a study on the brain, and it's jumping synapses, right? Electrical jump, boom.
Yeah.
That's your thought. Now, of course, if you have too much sugar, too much salt, or maybe if you deny water, the synapse will jump differently. Okay? So that means, really, you can't believe anything you think. You can't believe anything you think. It's just a jumping synapse. And then if there's like a little, you have a bad experience, well, then there becomes like a little dog leg on the thought. So now it's not like, oh, I see some fire. I see fire! You see, or, oh, I see a dog. Oh, there's a dog. You see, so our thinking is just jumping synapses. That's all it is. Nothing.
No, that's why I said, you know, when Maulana Nasruddin said, this is the center of the world.
Well, that's right. And the ego, that's
we are not talking about the geometric dimensions of it, but rather an individual's level of comfort of being there.
That's what I was saying earlier when you mentioned chaos. Everything essentially is all chaos.
Right. No, it's all order. The universe is
it's all chaos. Each person uses their rationale in order to make that straight line through that chaos, and what's the best way around it, through it, over or under. Everybody has trials and tribulations and mountains that they have to jump over. God puts these in our lives for learning experiences. I had stage 4 cancer 4 years ago. I'm supposed to be dead. They gave me less than 6 months to live, esophageal. And I beat it. That was 4 years ago.
And you're still smoking.
Yes, and I'm still smoking. But it was caused from heartburn, acid reflux. The acid reflux had eroded my esophagus down by my stomach. But after that whole ordeal of being on chemo and radiation for over a year, and then a major surgery, then chemo again for another year, I kind of look at life at 180 degrees now. And when you mention chaos out here, life is chaos. Every heel is chaos. But those are put into our lives so we can make informed decisions in order to get through those. We have to do what's right to get through those hills, and those are our learning experiences for our lives.
The problem with seeing chaos as a problem rather than as an order is because our approach is rational.
Right.
Because we are looking for a pattern. If we can't find it, then it's chaos, and if we can't find it, then it's bad.
Well, you got to
I
find
would
a pattern
find
to get through the chaos.
you're right, but our being is equipped with another way of approaching this would be is that you don't have to rationally understand it
Right.
to feel comfortable
True.
with it. You could go from over here
Right.
and just feel it.
Very true.
And once you go from here, then it is not a matter of you understanding it in order for it to be beautiful.
Totally.
But rather, it is beautiful without you understanding it.
Right. I did that and that. Both when I was going through my ordeal.
Then there's no chaos for you. As
We want to thank Zaman for his beautiful presentation.
And
And
then we all want to come to your garden.
no problem. That's okay. Like I said in the beginning, that was both a disclaimer and an apology and all that. Because like I said, I will share reflections and they're in the raw. So it's not that I was not prepared out of disrespect for the audience, but I thought that it would be better to approach it in a way with me not sounding authoritative, but rather just to share. So thank you.
Thank you
Yeah,
for your
exploratory.
share.
So.